Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Metroid Prime Remastered. In the last part we went deeper into Phandrana Drifts and found ourselves in the Space Pirate base here, and now we're in a combat section on the rooftop. Now last part we may have gotten the super missile at the very end, but I don't really use it a lot to start, only because I only have 55 missiles right now, so I only have 11 uses. I'd rather save my missiles for individuals for the most part. With that said, I do recommend using super missiles a lot against these guys. I forget if they're called the Sky Pirates or the Flying Pirates, because the missiles themselves, as you've seen throughout the LP, already have a bit of a homing to them. And in fact, there's some cases where you can accidentally have them loop around an enemy, sort of like it's the Sonic Hero's homing attack. But the super missiles especially home in and will not relent until they hit the target, it feels like. They are absurdly good at homing on the target like so. Be careful with the Flying Pirates, though, because they take about, I think, 3 to 4 missiles to kill normally. But when they die, they do power dive to the floor, and they do explode, and their dive can hurt you. In fact, I think I've even gotten killed by it when I was a kid. So be a little wary of them when they're falling down. We'll have ways to negate that down the line, especially with the next beam we get. But for now, you just gotta watch out. In some regards, I probably shouldn't be swapping back to the power beam as often as I am, but I really do like the power beam's utility for combat at the moment, as while it isn't as damaging as an individual wave beam, rapid fire missiles is worth it. Well, hello there, you little shits. New creature, Talon Metroid, energy-based parasitic predator. The effects of Phazon have turned these Metroids, a species of alpha predator native to SR-388, into a unique subspecies found only on Talon 4. A Talon Metroid will latch onto its prey and drain energy, growing larger as it does. The only way to shake an attached Talon Metroid is to enter Morph Ball mode and lay a bomb. With that said, Talon Metroids are noticeably weaker than SR-388 and Zebes Metroids, because even your basic power beam can hurt and kill them, same with the missiles. You don't need the ice beam 5 missile combo to kill them whatsoever. And that's probably mostly just to make them more viable to fight in this combat style, but it's notable all the same. Log 10.891.0, the reconstruction of Geoform 187, codenamed Ridley, was recently completed. After his defeat on Zebes, Command ordered a number of metagenetic improvements for him. Though aggressive, we were able to implement these changes in a cycle. The metamorphosis was painful, but quite successful in the end. Early tests indicate a drastic increase in strength, mobility, and offensive capability. Cybernetic modules and armor plating have been added as well. We believe our creation, now called Meta Ridley, will become the mainstay of our security force, a job he will certainly relish. Man, so he didn't even want to come back to life? You guys just brought him back from the dead? That's kinda shitty. Time for log 10.444.4, I believe. Its initial transfer of Metroids to Talon 4 research facilities has been completed. 3 were terminated in an incident at the landing site, but the others were pacified and transported safely. Initial Phazon fusion testing is underway. We are eager to observe the effects of Phazon on Metroids, especially their ability to absorb and process the energy given off by Phazon sources. Early research suggests a considerable growth in power and size. Whether the creature stays stable thereafter remains to be seen. Yeah, sure, infuse whatever is causing things to become like the Parasite Queen into the nigh indestructible parasites. Sure, great idea. Log 10.957.2. Confidence is high regarding Phazon applications. We know enough about Phazon now to begin combining with Space Pirate DNA. The code name for this venture will be Project Helix. Preliminary studies indicate that Phazon infusion could produce radical new pirate genomes. Benevolent mutation levels are high in current test subjects. Phazon madness is a concern, but refinements in the infusion process should reduce or neutralize the odds of mental degeneration. Yeah, that kind of goes into the thing I brought up a little bit last part. Supposedly, these space pirates are supposed to be the same ones you fight, basically, on Zebes, even though they don't nowhere near as crab-like. And I guess the implication could be, for one thing, different character designers, but that they work on their own genomes so frequently they basically change shape every couple of years, I would guess. They get a little more into that, into the Prime sequels. In fact, the Prime 2 and 3 space pirates look completely different than these ones, even. Log 11.420.7, Metroid dissection continues to provide more questions than answers. Our research teams have isolated the energy conduits that run from the invasive twin mandibles to the energy core in the creature's quadripartite nucleus, but the manner in which a Metroid actually extracts the life force from its prey remains an utter mystery. The victim does not lose blood or any other vital fluids, and yet the Metroid extracts energy. Identifying this energy is our central problem. It takes no physical form, and yet without it, the victim dies. We will continue to research this matter, as the isolation of this life-giving essence could be the key to our ascendance. Space magic. Gotcha. Log 11.550.6. Studies of Metroid biology continue, though with limited progress. It seems likely that we will be much more successful using the Metroids for our means, rather than trying to reproduce their powers. If they could be adequately tamed, we would have no need of a proper understanding of their metabolism. A small force of disciplined Metroids could wipe out entire armies, and once we find a way to shield them from cold containment weapons, they'll be invincible. Furthermore, if we could then harvest the energy they've consumed, we could have a near limitless source of power at our disposal. The fact that both the Pirates and the Galactic Federation honed in on, if we make the Metroids invincible to cold, we have a great weapon. It's kind of terrifying in its own right. It's actually one of the few things, I guess, that Other M technically got right. I really just messed up jumping on that platform. That's kind of sad. Before we move on to the next room, though, I do want to come back up here, because you may have even heard it earlier. There's a missile expansion in this room. Jump onto this little platform here, and then roll across this very precarious runway for the Morph Ball. I recommend just tapping the analog stick in a direction, not holding it, because doing this in a continuous roll, your momentum will probably get too high, and you'll just accidentally roll off and have to try again. Thankfully, there's no panel we have to scan to open this missile tank up, and there's no time limit, because that definitely seems like a thing, particularly like Prime 2 or 3 would do. So, the Metroids in this base are actually a little funny. Here's the Ice Beetles I mentioned last part. This is a missable scan, so get them now. At least I think they're missable, but if I think they're missable, you might as well make sure, just in case. Ooh, this room. We have a couple things we need to do in this room. We need to scan each of the computers as we go down, particularly the red icon, to open a part of the central tank control circuit in order to get that item there. Just make sure you scan all the computers. It's really mostly just a room filled with space pirates at the end of the day, though. So, the Metroids in this game are interesting in that if they're ever in a room with space pirates as well, you can get them out of your containment tanks, especially if they're in just the glass ones like that first Metroid we fought was. And they will actively attack the space pirates if they're closer to them than they are to you. That does technically strengthen the Metroids for when they try to attack you, but if you're just trying to walk past them and ignore them, that's not a problem whatsoever. Auxiliary circuit connection terminated. One more to go and we get whatever that is. It looks like a cool pair of sunglasses. Thermal imaging software exceeding initial expectations. Combat applications are being evaluated by command. Field testing in Phendrana region approved. Thermal tech? That sounds like it could be interesting. And that's a completely different colored door there. That's a white door. We can't open that until we get the next beam. You might think to keep that in mind for later. Honestly, that's probably one of the few doors you really don't need to, because there's another way to reach what's behind that. Once we scan that third red icon in this room, that item's gonna be available to us, and, it's one I'm hit and miss on, honestly, because I think the way they handle some of these mechanics in the trilogy is a little hit or miss overall. Thermal Visor acquired. Press down the D-pad to use it. And for some reason that thing was linked to the power, because it's now pitch dark in here. You need to use the Thermal Visor to really see it all, honestly. So, the Thermal Visor allows you to see thermal readings of enemies, and this does allow you to actually counter the Shadow Pirate's stealth mechanic, because you can just see where they are at all times. But the main purpose of the Thermal Visor is to power up certain doors. There are certain ones that are now powered down throughout the game, including the one at the top of this room we used to enter it, that you need to use the Thermal Visor to find a power conduit to shoot the wave beam into in order to power those doors. But there aren't too many of those in the game, and I think as long as you know where to fire the wave beam ahead of time, you can just shoot the power conduits even if you can't see them and they'll still activate. But that, of course, requires knowing where they are on a second playthrough. I think there's only one time you outright need this in the game, and that's at the very end of it. I think you otherwise can technically avoid having it at all somehow. But I should note, most of the enemies I've said throughout our visits here to Phendrana thus far that are missable despawn when you get the Thermal Visor. The Ice Shriek Bats are gone. I think the Ice Burrowers are now gone as well. So be careful if you're going for the scan logs and grabbing this, because this would be you're screwed out of 100% now. And admittedly, it's around now in a game, percentage-wise, where missing an item permanently feels the most devastating. But first, real quick, in here we got a new enemy. This is the security drone. These guys can be taken out by your wave beam and a couple of charge shots pretty easily. But what's annoying about them is that they also generate static like the Bombus, and they're kind of hard to see even with the Thermal Visor. If an enemy is close in temperature to their surroundings, like if they're made of metal like this, the Thermal Visor's not exactly effective at seeing them. But what I mean by around now being is the worst time to miss an item. When you're at the start of a game and you miss an item, you can just restart the game and it probably won't be that offensive overall. If you're at the end of the game, you're probably gonna go, well, I'm already all the way here, let's just go finish it anyway. It's when you're particularly between, like, the 33 to 75% markers, I'd say. Maybe even like the 85% markers, where you're like, man, there's still so much left of the game. I don't want to, man, playthrough ruined. And I think I've told this story on content before, but one of my most apparent stories like this is Persona 3 FES. I was trying to do 100% playthrough of that in like late high school, early college. And I got to like late October to mid-November. And there's a side quest in that game where you need to go to a bathroom in one of the town areas and get a swabbing mop for a bathroom, essentially. And that's a weapon your main character can use. It's not a very effective weapon, it's mostly a joke weapon. But the Velvet Room attendant in that game needs that item for a side quest, and you turn it into her and you get some good stuff. But me, forgetting about that, had that item and sold it for money because I needed it to upgrade my equipment, and my most recent save I could go back to was like 3 months before that, and it was bad. It was bad. I stopped that playthrough, and I haven't gone back to that game since. I think about it. With that said, the escape from the space pirate base, while it's very dark in here, isn't a lot to worry about because you can ignore most of the enemies at this point. The main thing you're going to want to do is grab a single item along the way, which even then I could have gone back to get as soon as I got the super missile. I just didn't want to have to go back and forth through a couple rooms, making this visit to the space pirate base kind of weirdly unstreamlined. I think it's in this room? Yes. This tube right here next to the one with the Metroid in it is a cordite walled tube. And cordite, we've seen that term a couple times throughout the game. That is a material that can only be destroyed by a super missile. And within that, you spend 5 missiles to get 5 missiles. I'd say that's pretty worth it. Now, unfortunately, because of how I've been kind of willy-nilly about my missiles thus far, I don't have a lot of missiles going into the next boss fight, but that's not a lot to worry about overall. If you wanted to, you could go grind for missiles. I'm just trying not to do that because I'm trying to get to this game and get through it. Not super fast, but as quickly as I can with the streamlining I'm doing. I do recommend at this point, though, especially if you're taking as much damage along the way as I am, that you go use that save point I opened up early last part. Just so you don't have to go back all the way through the space pirate base in case you die. Saving, thankfully, doesn't take a lot of time in this game, and I think you can skip the animation with it if you mash the A button or something like that. Back to the good music. I like the space pirate theme. I do. But it gets a bit repetitive by the end of the game, admittedly. And I want to say they keep that song all through the trilogy? It's been a while, so I might be wrong about that. Now that we have both the Thermal Visor and the Super Missiles, we can come across to this door here, blast off that cordite shelling, and the door here isn't powered, because there's a power conduit up here we need to shoot. And now we can go over here. We're actually coming up on one of my favorite rooms in the game, because the boss fight we're coming up on, I'd say is potentially the most iconic boss fight for this game, barring the 3 at the very end of the game, I guess. Technically 4 at the very end of the game. To the point where this was an active hazard in Metroid Prime Pinball, and I'll talk about that game eventually. Thardus. This is one of my favorite bosses in the game. An animated sentient creature of stone charged with phazon radiation. The phazon radiation given off by Thardus negates auto-targeting systems, preventing lock-on. It may be possible to acquire alternate targets with a different visor. The chaotic nature of phazon radiation leads to instability in its structural integrity. Thardus can encase targets in ice, and its colossal size and strength make it a formidable opponent. So, I said earlier that you technically don't need the Thermal Visor. I think that's actually only true in the original GameCube release for this boss, because you need the Thermal Visor in order to target his weak points that the Thermal Visor can actively see. And these kind of go in two phases. Each section, you shoot until it breaks, the Thermal Visor gets overloaded, then you need to shoot the phazon-encrusted rock until it explodes. This is where having more missiles on you can come in handy, because you can just shoot the Thermal Visor section until it explodes, and then super missile it once you're out of the Thermal Visor in order to make this fight go by pretty quickly. Attack-wise, Thardus doesn't got a lot. He can swing his arms, he can roll in his own little morph ball formation that's kind of hard to hit the phases you need to damage in it. And towards the middle of the fight, he'll actually add a few more attacks. One that namely encases the entire area in a very harsh blizzard, which makes visibility hard without the Thermal Visor. And I think he has a little bit of a thunderstorm attack. Notably, he also, I think, has an ice breath attack that can freeze you just like the Sheegoth does. So be careful of that. This fight isn't hard, but it's such a cool spectacle and idea for a boss fight that's always just kind of stuck with me. And there's some interesting things about this fight in particular. There's no way to do this with the natural progression, but if you do some notable sequence breaks, you can bring the next two beams into this fight. And the beam that's the next one we're going to grab does no damage to him. But the fourth beam in the game is specially programmed to do more damage to him, but there's no way to do that naturally. And I've always found that interesting, because it means to me that at some point in development, each of the Prime games probably had a few sequence breaks intended or a different progression for items you could do, but for one reason or another, they probably just had to streamline things into a more specific order. It's either that or the programmer was just going, you know, I doubt there's a way, but just in case. Sort of like how in the case of GoldenEye, the multiplayer was a very last-minute addition kind of deal. Same with why the pistol in Halo 1 does so much damage. Now, there's nothing you can really do to control this, but I believe there's always a chance that when Thardus is rolling, he can get stuck in the wall, and there's nothing you can really do about that, especially if he gets stuck too far in. I think if he starts rolling again, he can get himself unstuck, but watch out for that. I'm not even sure if that's possible in the remastered version. I think it is in both the GameCube and Trilogy releases, though, so be wary. Alright, at this point, since we're at about the 2/3 point of his health remaining, I believe the blizzard is active, so if you enter the normal visor, it's going to be harder to see until you, I believe, break open one of his rocks? The big problem with some of the bosses in Prime is that they can drag on a bit long, but that's partially because I'm comparing it to 2D Metroid bosses, which even once you start getting things like the parry in there in Samus Returns On, aren't usually too long to begin with, especially if you fight them really efficiently. Metroid Prime in general, I'd say, has good boss lengths, especially with the abilities you get down the line. But there are some, like Flagara, if you're really fast about it, or the fourth to last boss fight, that can just go by super quickly. I don't think he's the longest boss in the game, nor is he the most tedious, because that's actually, I think, the third to last boss in the game that's like that. But it is notable. Also, we only know about this because of interviews with some of the devs, I believe. There was a version of Thardus that was originally going to have an orange glowing core, because at some point, apparently, he was supposed to be fought in some variant of Magmore Caverns and be a lava-based creature, but due to both some amount of budget and time constraints, they moved him over here to Phendrana Drifts. Not super important, because at the end of the day, a rock monster can probably go anywhere if Breath of the Wild is any indication with how they handle the Taloses. But it's cool all the same to see how stuff like that changes through development. Admittedly, out of all of the Metroid games proper, we probably know the most about the development for the Prime trilogy than any of the other Metroid games. If only because Retro is a lot more open to talking about the dev stories, especially years after the fact. Like, I won't be surprised if in like 10, 15 years we have a lot of stories about Prime 4's development. because they're being still very quiet about that at this point. Who knows, maybe by the time this gets uploaded, because that should be closer to E3 season, maybe we finally have a trailer. Or at that point, maybe we know if Prime 2 Remastered is happening. I would like that to happen because I would like to revisit Prime 2 in a way that maybe isn't a pain in the ass to play in some regards, but I'll talk more about that when I get to Prime 2. 20 years later, that rock still makes me laugh. In its first returning appearance since Metroid 2, the Spider Ball is back. Hold ZL when you got Morph Ball tracks, and you can magnetize to them. Now you can actually scan these tracks. Kind of weird that you can only scan some things until after you get the item, but oh well. The Spider Ball in this game is weird. Like, it's very limited in use. You can only use it on tracks like this. And it controls about as weirdly as it did in Metroid 2 in the regards of your control, which direction your control stick sends you in, kind of changes depending on where the camera swings. If you're just holding one direction, you'll probably still keep moving, but if the camera swings and you stop from moving, your control is going to get a little weird. Also, I doubt this is still the case in Prime Remastered, but apparently behind the scenes, the rock object that Samus gets hit in the head with in that cutscene is titled rock_in yo ass. Which, I like it when games do that. It's kind of like how for Way Forward's DuckTales Remastered, they had that placeholder text that was like a bunch of swear words that Disney got real mad about. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in Part 7, now that we're done in Vendrona just for now, we're going to head back to a new section of Magmore Caverns and see where we can go from there. See you guys then.